Oh, hello, do come in. Glad you've dropped round again. It's take a while if you look just to look around the shelves. I wonder if you've spotted over here on the desk, on the large table there, I've got all my books on the Arthurian romances, the matter of Britain. That's for a project I'm going to do one day called Merlin's Isle, having a go at telling those tales in verse myself. You can see my view from the window too. Now, I promised last time, why don't you come with me over here? I promised last time that I'd take one of my own books off the shelf and we'd reflect a bit together on the word spell. Somewhere along here. I never quite have them all here. I'm always either lending or giving them away. But I think somewhere amongst my books here, there we are, is The Singing Bowl, a book of my poetry with Canterbury Press. So why don't you make yourself comfortable here? Just settle down, sit in the chair there. I'll come round the other side. Good. I've got a nice cup of tea here, or in fact a mug. C.S. Lewis said you can't get a novel long enough or a mug of tea big enough for me. It's a bit too early in the evening for stronger stuff, I think, but we'll have something together when you call on a later date. I said I wanted to reflect a little bit about the word spell. It's had some comment, people saying, oh, we're going over to Malcolm's for a spell in the library. And of course a spell can be just a period of time. But I wanted to summon, if I can use that word, the other sense of the word spell, the sense of magic spell. Not, I hasten to say, any kind of dark or black or forbidden magic, but a kind of kindling, glorious, creative magic of an entirely good sort, a deep magic from the dawn of time, as Lewis would put it. And I wanted just to comment on the odd thing that we use the same word, spell, for the difficult thing that one had to learn to do in English classes as a child, and I was very bad at learning to spell words. And for that wonderful evocative word, spell, to cast an enchantment or a spell. In fact, the word enchantment as well has chant in it. There's something, as it were, rooted and linked and cognate together about language and a kind of evocative creative magic. And for that matter, the word gramma goes back, the word grimoire for a magic book, or indeed the very earliest senses, magical senses of the word glamour are related to grammar. And there's a good reason for that, because magic, language is itself an essentially magical thing, if you think about it. To take a sound in the air, a spoken word, or a shape with these mysterious and arcane shapes we call the letters of the alphabet, to be able to take those things and somehow through those things, which are clearly not, if Keats tells us that the nightingale singest of summer, beech and green and shadows numberless, singest of summer with full-throated ease, we see the beech and green and the shadows numberless, even though the words, if we looked at them on the page, are not the things that they evoke. They have, as it were, a kind of summoning power. All language has that. The word utter, to utter something, is related to the idea of making things outer. So all cultures have felt there's a kind of magic in language, especially poetical language, that spells and spelling go together in some way. But of course, for the Judeo-Christian culture, I think particularly for Christians, there's a really deeper theological foundation to this awe and reverence for the word and words and language. In Genesis, we have this idea that God, as it were, utters or speaks things into being. He says, let there be light, and there is light. And then, of course, most astonishingly of all, we have that beautiful passage at the beginning of John, en archein ho logos. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and all things were made through him. And the Greek word there for made is poein, poetried into being, as it were. That's where the word poetry comes from. So there are some deep roots there. And lots of people, and particularly some Christian creative writers, Tolkien especially, have reflected on this idea of speech and language as a kind of God-given magic, a sub-creation. Before Tolkien, of course, Shakespeare gave a quasi-magical account, really, of how poetry works. The poet's eye in fine frenzy rolling doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven, and as imagination bodies forth the form of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. There's a great work of high magic, if ever there was one. And I've reflected on those things myself in various ways, and in the end I came to put those reflections together in a sonnet, which borrows a little bit from Tolkien's great essay on fairy stories, and nods gently in the reference to the river Alph to Coleridge, who's the other great person who understands this summoning and vocative and invocative power of language itself. So here's a poem of mine from the Singing Bowl, simply called Spell, and it's a kind of ode of, it's a sonnet in fact, but it's a kind of ode of thanksgiving for these mysterious 26 signs, out of which all the books in this room are woven, and through the books in this room so many worlds are opened and evoked. So, Spell. Summon the summoners, the 26 enchanters, spelling silence into sound. They bind and loose, they find and are not found. Recall the river tongues from Alph to Styx. Summon the summoners, the shaping shapes, the grounds of sound, the generative gramma, signs of the mystery, inscribed arcana, runes from the root tree written in the deeps, leaves from the tail tree lifted, swift and free, shining, recombining in their dance the genesis of every utterance, pattering the patterns of the tree. Summon the summoners and let them sing. The summoners will summon everything. And in a way, whenever you open a book, pull off a book from the shelf in my study or library or yours, you're summoning the summoners, and the magic begins to happen as your imagination is kindled through language and you make a kind of magic together. There's a real sense in which every study, including this one, is rather like the magician's study. It is a magician's study in some ways. All these books are magic. And rather like the magician's study, do you remember that great episode in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, my favourite of the Narnia books, where Lucy goes up to the magician's study to try and find a spell for making things visible, which again is another thing that the imaginative writing do. It makes invisible things visible, gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. You remember that? And she does find that spell in the end. But there's also another lovely spell in that book, which is another sign of what I hope we might be doing in a gentle way when you pop round, when you can, and join me here in my library. And Lewis gives it such a beautiful name. It's called She Reads a Spell for the Refreshment of the Spirit, which turns out to be a story. It's here. Here's The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I tell you what, I don't think we have time for it now. It's hiding behind a couple of pipes. But next time, let's read together for fun just that lovely bit in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and the spell in the library will turn out to be a spell for the refreshment of the spirit. Speaking of which, a good cup of tea. Thanks for joining me.